Hi, I'm freelance music journalist Kira Schlechter. I'm here with Dave Fox, bassist for the Central Pennsylvania metal band Balistic, to talk about the band's upcoming album, The Parson's Tale. So Balistic hadn't been active since around 2004, and now you're back with The Parson's Tale. How did the project come about after so many years apart? What was the impetus?
Well, I was working with our singer Mark in a cover band, and the rehearsal space was pretty far away, so we'd be talking and stuff like that, and he often brought up how he wanted to expand on some of the songs that we had already written, because we had like 3 albums up before, and we had written one about one of the 7 deadly sins, and he goes, wow, that'd be cool if we do all of them. And that just kind of put a germ in my head. I thought, well, and I started thinking about it. I started reading about it, started doing a lot of research about that. And he also wanted to do about the virtues too, and I was thinking to myself, man, there's no way that I want to write 14 songs. That'd be a lot. I mean, nobody does that anymore. So then I thought, well, okay, why don't I just combine a sin and a virtue together and make it more like a progressive album, where there's different tempo changes and time changes and key changes and stuff like that. So there's the specific delineations between, like, say, envy and kindness, okay, which are the 2 opposites. So there's, a part about that, and the songs started to develop into characters, and it just snowballed from there.
So that's an interesting title, The Parson's Tale. Where did that come from?
Well, it comes from Chauncey. Is that how you say it? Chaucer? Yeah. And a good friend of mine suggested it, because it was the Canterbury Tales is part of that, and it's a similar vibe. And Chaucer was what, like in the 1500s or something like that? I forget when they wrote that, or when he wrote that, and of course I read into that too, and I was like, oh, okay, and that just seemed to work, because I was like, okay, let's be grandiose about it, right? And write something because I was always a big fan of the 70s progressive rock, like Yes and Rush and Genesis and stuff like that, and more, later on, like the Police, and how they wrote songs. And I thought, yeah, let's just do that, because I was always a huge fan of those albums where they had the big the artwork and the lyrics that you had to read like 4 or 5 times, like, oh, I think I get it, or you'd be around with your friends and partying and stuff, and everybody's like, oh, I think it means this. I said, no, I think it means that, and everybody gets together and figures it out, So that's kind of where I thought, yeah, that's what we got to do, and people will get it, I'm sure.
So each song, you said, is a sin and a virtue. Aside from not wanting to write 14 songs, why did you want to do that, to sort of combine the 2?
I just thought, why did I want to do that? I thought it would make it more interesting for the listener, because, and maybe it was just something about myself, because I always am interested in songs. Like I said, I was a huge Rush fan and a Yes fan, and they did in like pre Tom Sawyer, like around Permanent Waves, Hemispheres, those songs were like epics, 5, 10, 20-minute songs, tons of different parts, And I guess another, I hate to say it because everybody says it, but the last Beatles album, the White Album, and Sgt. Pepper was like that. And Paul McCartney and Wings did a lot of that stuff. I mean, like when you hear Band on the Run, and you hear these certain, and they just, those parts, they could be their own separate songs if you listen to them. You know, dun, 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 get up, get out of bed. You know, it just all of a sudden just pops out of nowhere. I mean, but you've listened to it and you're like, yeah, that works. That's how it fits. And that's how I started writing the music to this stuff like that, because I thought that'd be cool to make and then that would fit with the different characters. And once I started writing lyrics and these characters started popping up, then I was like, okay, this part has to be totally different than, because this is a whole other person singing or talking this whole other lyric.
And as you just said, each song has an actual cast of characters, a story behind it. So where did that, you talked about that a little bit, but where did that idea come from, and which came first, the story or the song?
You mean like the story or the lyrics or the music?
Well, the story, those characters, or the song itself?
Well, when I started with the sins and the virtues, I really went back into a lot of, I want to say like 12th century literature, 10th century, like coming out of the Dark Ages into the Middle Ages and stuff. And that's where, well, how want to put this? It's not a religious album, okay? But it has to do with the different sides of mankind, of human beings, how we really are. And there's a lot of people want to think, oh, well, you know, 7 deadly sins, that's in the Bible. It's like, no, it's not in there at all. There's nothing like that. This was brought about by medieval, let's say monks or whatever, priests. The Roman Catholic Church was only just, you know, getting their foothold on the population. I mean, the Pope then was more of a military figure, to be honest. I mean, because I think, if I'm correct, Rome had already fallen. You know, Constantinople was the second Roman Empire, basically. And a lot of these writings were coming about from that. And I decided to get into that aspect of how humans really are. As it was explained to me by, my mom was very religious. And it was explained to me by one of the brothers at her church. And he had a pie plate, right? And he put a dent in it. And he said, that's sin. You know, like if you have that thing and it drops to the floor, your favorite one, and whenever you make something out of that, it's still gonna have that dent. That's what that is. And that's what we are. If you, because this is all, I don't know other religions. I know the Christian religion. You know, I mean, I have a cursory knowledge of, you know, Islam and Judaism. But I was brought up in a Christian religion, and that is the one that has a lot of this, let's say, dogma, okay? But it kind of, the concept of sin kind of got used in the medieval times to try to keep people in line, all right? You were, you know, if you didn't pay your taxes, you were a sinner, or you didn't, you know, do this, you were a sinner, and everyone's like, oh, I'm a sinner. And that's where the concept of penance came about, they would use it to, some of them, they abused people. People didn't read then. We didn't have printing, and if you read, you had to read Latin. And most of the people, English then you wouldn't recognize today. That language wasn't even really written down. So people couldn't really read scripture. They didn't know, really. They only knew what that guy up on the pulpit was telling them. And he was telling them, you're a sinner. And they would give the virtues out then too, to say, if you want to be a good person, you have to have abstinence. You have to have humility. You have to have diligence. You have to be, chaste. You have to be kind. Blah blah blah. And everything. Yeah, great. That sounds good. Let's do that. Which is true. If you do all those things, you're a pretty nice person. But the entire concept, what I finally found out is sin is a thing. People say, oh, that lady was a Christian, but she cheated me out of $10 or whatever, so she's a sinner. So she's just an evil person. It's like, well, it's not necessarily evil, she's just is what she is. Because that's what we are. That was the whole, that was kind of an awakening moment for me, I think, is when I was reading through this stuff and I started writing this stuff. I thought, yeah, you just have to, that stuff is within you. And you just have to decide whether you're going to fall for it or not, whether you're going to go through with it. That's really, I don't know if I answered your question. I kind of went off on a tangent.
No, you did. But was it a particular song that inspired the subsequent story in each song, or was it did you have the germ for the story and then the song followed?
I think
story / cast of characters.
Oh, okay. Well, I think what I did let's take lust and chastity. When I thought about lust, I thought about all of the stuff I thought about was more like a modern day, like somebody like you would just run into in the street, and I thought to myself, there's a whole ton of people out there that, you're a woman, right? Just checking, everybody's like, okay, you never know from day to day. But every woman I know has run into a guy that creeped them out. Everyone. There is not one. And they might, and I think, I'm a little older, believe it or not. So I've known and got to talk with, a whole pile of women over the years. And they remember to the minute of that one guy. And that to me was lust. How this, and then I started thinking about how a person like that acts. And some of those people, like say some kind of, or a geeky kind of guy, is kind of a little overweight or whatever, but a lot of them have the same characteristics. They're desperately lonely. They may have been with an overbearing mother. All right, they're not necessarily what you would call capable in life. Okay, but when you're lonely, all your mind does is spin. And that's where you start to dredge up the inner parts of your being. And if, like I said, if you have that dent, everybody has that, he starts thinking about it. Like say there's in high school, for guys like that, sometimes girls can be cruel. you know, they'll say, "Oh, Billy, can you do my homework?" You know, and he's like, "Man, she loves me," you know, because he's so lonely. But he doesn't have the guts to tell her that. But then he does her homework and hands it to her, and she's like, "Oh, thanks, Bobby." You know, it's Billy. Boom, and off she and she's like, "Oh," you know. But then he starts to think about it, and this happens all the time because he's like trying to, but and it just spins and spins and spins and spins, and the next thing you know, he might be doing something bad. And then I thought, here's a guy, he's sitting in a coffee shop and he's thinking about this, and in walks some young girl coming in from work, gonna zoom in to get a coffee, and he's just like fixated on her. And like that moment, like you probably had moments like that in your life where you're like, you know, man, that guy's a, you know, you're talking to him, that guy's a weirdo. You know, just the way he was looking at me. You know, and the song is kind of what this guy was thinking about in his head. And then there's another section of the song where he's like imagining that he has a hold of her, but she's fighting him back because she's getting ready to get married, you know, she's saved herself for her husband, you know, it's a kind of an old-fashioned thing, but she doesn't want to be manhandled by some stranger, you know. Who wants that? Nobody does. But that was kind of and I started thinking, and then with the other characters, I mean, I've watched tons of movies and read tons of books, and, you know, and just watching people, how they are, I mean, you can kind of see how a lot of this stuff just happens. And it's not, you know, I'm not saying sin's not bad, because it is bad, but if it depends if you act on it. You know, if you say, okay, I'm going to, you know, rob this bank today, or I'm going to buy this company and I'm going to sell everything off, you know, like the Wall Street movie, or what was that, Pretty Woman, you know, Richard Gere, you know, I'm going to sell your company, oh, stop it, you know. And Julia Roberts, that's the kind of the archetype of that. And really, if you think about it, he was the greedy banker. She was a prostitute, but she had a heart of gold, okay? And she gets him to take another path. And that's kind of what this whole thing is about. So it wasn't really one song, that one idea that made me start in on it, I guess. But I just started writing it. And I kind of wrote like little outlines of the stories out, and then I just started writing lyrics. And I gotta tell you, I'll never write like this again, because it's hard. It's like Rush wrote, like they would write, Neil Peart wrote the lyrics, and Geddy and Alex wrote the tunes, and they would marry them together. And that's kind of basically what I did, except it was just me doing it. And I'm gonna tell you, that's a bitch to do that, because then you're like thinking, oh my God, you know, okay, now I have to do a 7/4 measure here, or I gotta erase all of this just to make this fit, because you start seeing how the lyric goes and see how it might sing, if you know what I mean. Mm-hmm. Like you're talking, and it's like, how does that sound? And I'm thinking to myself, I kind of write in a weird way, because I'm like, okay, what does greed sound like? Right? I had a music teacher when I was in high school, said go outside and play me what that tree sounds like. I mean, he was an old hippie guy, you know what I mean? And no, we didn't have any acid, you know, when we were like not 10, you know, I was like maybe 14 years old, wasn't there yet. But I actually went out and tried to do it. What's that tree sound like? And that's actually a pretty, that's a wild way to do music, because when you play it, then you play it for somebody else, they're like, what's that? You know, they don't hear a tree, right?
Mm-hmm.
Nobody does that, but I can hear it, you know, but so I guess that's what all that mattered, I guess.
True. Well, since the album is about the 7 deadly sins, is there a sin that you identify with more or less than the others? And does the corresponding song on the album jive with that or not?
Is there a song in there that, what was the first thing?
What sin do you identify
What
most
do I
with, and
identify?
which one do you identify least with? And then does the corresponding song jive with each of those?
Interesting. Huh. I would have to say, I wrote a song. One of the tunes on here is about pride and humility, and that was called I Am Your God. And that one rings to me because I ran into the character, the prideful one in the song. I've run into a ton of people like that they think that whatever they say is the gospel, that they can't be wrong. And I've noticed that in myself sometimes. You know, you're just like give some offhand remark. You know, somebody says, "Oh, the car, blah blah blah." It's like, well, why don't you just do this? You know, everybody does that. Why don't you just do it like this? You know, and you don't really think if you hurt that person's feelings or anything like that. But that song was more, because I'm like, the way I wrote it was like right around when I came up with the idea. That was a lot of when it was around when COVID was going on, and I'm a truck driver, and man, they clamped down on us. Like, you know, they turn around and tell you on TV that you're the essential ones, you're the blood that's keeping this country moving, and blah blah blah, and then they would screw you at every turn. We couldn't go to the bathroom at some of these places. They closed the rest areas down. And even if you pulled in, because it isn't like they didn't know what we were gonna do. You know, if you sneaked into a rest area, the cops would be on you and like that. And why? Just because they could. Because somebody unleashed the hounds. You know? They couldn't not do it. Because once you let that authoritarian mindset loose in your head, you never let it go. Because you are the boss. You're telling these scum what to do. And that's what that song was about. And that the humility part in the song, the way the song went is this one person got this other person fired for whatever. She didn't have a mask on, or she forgot to do something, but she has her fired for something. And the person that had her fired got sick. Then, like, they all lived in the neighborhood, like got a cancer or something like that. I leave that kind of stuff like vague. I mean, you kind of get it. But the person that got fired gathered up a bunch of food that she had in her house and put it in a basket and set it on her door and rang the doorbell and left a note in there and said, "You took all that I had, but this is all I got left. And you can have it. Because you need it more than I do." That was the whole part of it. That to me is humility, right? But the prideful one will look at somebody like that and they'll spit in their face. Because it's like, you're weak. I would never do that. You know, now that to me is one of the most horrendous things. I mean, and it doesn't seem, if you think about it, I mean, and everybody would say, oh, well, you know, anger is bad, and, you know, lust is bad, and, you know, sloth or gluttony, those are bad. You know, it's like, well, to me, that attitude is the worst.
So pride would be the one you least identify with, in other words.
I think what I would say is it's the least and the most, because I have it both. You know, it's a struggle to. Writing this made me look inside in a way that I haven't ever. And it was an eye-opener. You know, you start thinking about this stuff and say, man, I really am a dick. You know, about it. You know, you really start to examine yourself. You're like, man, this is, or you think back on that, you know, of the way you treated other people or something, and they're like, man, I probably shouldn't have done that. You know? And I've texted or PM'd or plenty of people already, and just out of the blue, it's like, I'm sorry. And they were probably like, what for? You know, I mean, it probably didn't mean nothing to them. I mean, some of them, maybe they did remember, and it was like, who cares? You know, great. And that's forgiveness, you know, that's what you got to do for that. But yeah, I would say that's the answer. It's that one. But it was most and the least, that one thing. Now that you may not just ask me, now that I think about it, I guess I think that's what it is.
Okay. And then lastly, what do you hope to accomplish with the album, since it's been so long since you've been on the local scene? What would success mean or look like to you with this project?
I would say I think it would be great if we finally got this thing done and we played one show, and to have a couple people come up to me and say, I never thought about it like that before. You know, or come up and say, how did you do that? You know, where did that come from? That would be, even if I only did one decent sized show and had that, that would be great. I mean, I would love to, you know, I'd love to have that YouTuber Rick Beato call me in and say, hey man, you know, you would come on and, you know, talk about how you did all the, you know, this raise 9 stuff and, you know, diminished chords and blah blah blah. You know, I think that would be awesome. You know, something, I don't expect that to happen, but I also wouldn't mind having, you know, someone else like yourself, you know, say, hey, I want to hear some more about what you thought when you wrote that, the lyrics or the music, because to me, the music was, I didn't realize how complicated it was until I showed the other guys, and they were looking at me like, they were just like, you know, so then I'd write it out and, you know, here like this, and then, you know, it was difficult to put together. I mean, we had our drummer Dom he was busy with other stuff when I was doing the writing. I was kind of like using drum machine and stuff like that. And when he came in, I mean, he was like, this is going to take me a while, you know, with all the changes and stuff. It's not like it was super hard. I mean, this isn't Hemispheres, you know, where there's all different kinds of stuff, but it was with the time changes and you know, and the key changes and stuff. I mean, you just had to keep, your mind is always going when you're trying to play it. And that, I think, that would be a cool thing too, to have someone come up and say, man, I tried to figure that out. What did you do there? You know what I mean? And I'd be like, here, like this. You know, because to me, since I wrote it, it's like second nature. It's not a thing for me to just play it and to go from one section to the other. But and that's my pride sticking out there. I mean, see, like I told you, it's a wrestling match. You know, you can't just sometimes you just can't turn it off. And it's like, well, I think that would be cool. I know I've played it for a bunch of musicians, you know, to see if they wanted to work with us, you know, musicians that are way above my stature, way out of my league, you know, and they were to a man, they all were like, this stuff is cool. You know, I mean, there's not that many musicians around anymore because music is just not a thing. I mean, I don't know how old you are, but you know, when you and I were young, all we did was go to shows. You know, I was trying to tell my kids, I said, we went to concerts. I'll bet we did 5, 6, 7 concerts a year, seeing all kinds of different bands because they were just coming through. They were all over the place, and it didn't cost that much. It didn't cost you a week salary to go to a show back then because we were still selling, you could still sell albums, you know, and have radio play and that kind of stuff. But I would just hope if I get on a couple Spotify playlists, I'll be happier than a clam. I just think that'd be cool.
Okay. Well, thank you for your time. That's all I had.
Well, thank you.